and then we will hand it over. All right, Olivia and John, it's your show.
Sorry, muted, rookie mistake. Thank you so much. I am just going to quickly share my screen here. And hopefully you might see yourselves for a minute just while I pull up my presentation. So give me one moment. And tell me when someone could just give me a thumbs up that you can see this. That's awesome. Thanks, John. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time. We're really honored to be guests at your Snack and Share. And I know that a lot of people on this call have a lot of competing priorities and you're very busy. So we just really appreciate the minutes in your day. I did introduce myself already, but for anyone who jumped on subsequently, I'm Olivia Barker. I work for Clear Strategy. We are the firm that has been leading the project team, which I think, for the purposes of this conversation, you can think of as the staff to the producer responsibility organization. So we've been supporting a group of companies that was at first exploring the creation of a producer responsibility organization, and then ultimately formed one in the recent weeks. We're gonna back it up in just a moment here, and I know that some people are probably EPR experts, and we're definitely following the legislative developments last year very closely, but we find it's always helpful to sort of reground ourselves in what packaging EPR is, what a pro is. We are a pro or a prospective pro speaking with you today, but we don't like to make assumptions that everyone is as in the weeds related to EPR as we are. I just want to note that before we get into this, that a lot of our work over the recent months, in addition to standing up this organization, has been focused around engaging with organizations like Recycle Colorado. And I just really want to thank Liz and thank staff for being a great sounding board for us, for giving us this opportunity to speak, but also helping to guide us as we create this organization, to make sure that, as we're preparing, or as we prepared to apply to be the pro in Colorado, we are really considering, some of the state-specific realities, and making sure that all the things that are unique about the Colorado EPR law and the factors that will make Colorado's program different from other states, that, we have those top of mind from the very early stages. I think we first started chatting with Liz back in late summer, early fall, and there's certainly been a lot of work that has happened and a lot of progress made since that point. But we've just really appreciated the dialogue and are very excited to open up the communications channels to this broader group today. And I do want to note that sort of while our organization is preparing to deliver EPR compliance services potentially across multiple states, what we're going to be talking about today is sort of, yes, the overall structure for that organization, but then the Colorado specific approach, and our recognition that no two states are the same, and particularly Colorado has its own very special needs. And we're going into this knowing full well that Colorado is not California, and we need to be highly attuned to state and community specific realities as we move forward. One last thing I just want to mention in the intro here, and it's a bit of a public service announcement, but you'll see on the slide here that our name is Circularity Alliance. That is technically true. This is the name under which we filed our letter of intent, and it's also the name under which our organization incorporated last year. It is, however, a name that is going to change, and we are in the process of finalizing that name change, just as a result of a little bit of extra due diligence that we did, and some levels of risk that we weren't comfortable with related to potential trademark challenges. So that name will be changing, but just if anyone's following this process closely and knows that the sort of paying attention to the organizations that submitted letters of intent to CDPHE, Circularity Alliance is the one that we are representing today, and we will be very clear when we submit our application that was and is the same organization, even if we're under a different name. I'm going to do a quick preview of the agenda here. I just want to, I think we're going to give a bit of background, as I'd mentioned, just sort of reminding us all of why we're even here talking about a pro. We'll talk a little bit about the formation of our organization, how we came to be, who's been supporting it and leading the charge. We'll talk about where we are in the process of trying to be approved as the pro in Colorado and some of the next steps. And then we absolutely want to make sure we leave time for questions. So I know that there's a chat going, which I think we have visibility into. So if you don't want to, you're afraid you might lose your question, feel free to throw it into the chat and we'll come back to it at the end. We want to get through the slides. And then, as I said, we'll leave ample time for questions. So if you want to make note of your questions in the chat or just save them for discussion at the end, that'll work great. Great. I'm going to kick it over to John to give us a bit of background, and then we'll take it from there. John, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Olivia. And again, I'll just reiterate what Olivia said. I mean, we're going to sort of do a little bit of an EPR 101 and a Pro 101 here for those of you for whom this concept and idea and policy might be on the newer side. Some of you, this might be pretty familiar and in hand stuff. But generally speaking, when we're talking about EPR, extended producer responsibility, we're talking about a policy approach that's shifting the management of a particular material or group of materials from local governments or taxpayers to the producer. Generally these EPR laws are requiring producers, and here we're talking about brand owners, retailers, restaurants, first importers. It really depends on how the specific policy is drafted in a particular law, but requires that group to either fully fund or actually administer the collection processing of a particular material. Here we're talking about paper packaging and packaging like items that they might supply into a specific jurisdiction. EPR laws can fall along a pretty broad spectrum. So we could go from individual producers managing take back and end of life management of their own particular products, to group management, where you have companies jointly complying with the take back obligation through what's called a producer responsibility organization. And we'll get into that in a minute. Producer fees are typically funding collection, sortation, processing of packaging when we're talking about EPR for packaging in the residential waste management programs, but that can also be extended to the commercial space as well. And those fees generally also fund education and outreach, infrastructure improvements, and market development. So, the programs can have a fairly broad scope in terms of their engagement with existing and future recycling and waste management programs. Generally, the high-level EPR programs are reflecting the polluter pays principle. So, trying to shift that responsibility back onto the companies and organizations that are putting certain materials onto the market, and all of this is happening within an environmental context as well. So there are usually incentives built into the program to change packaging design choices, minimize waste, and sort of improve recyclability among a number of different attributes and policy incentives and goals. If you want to head on to the next slide there, Olivia. So like I said, there's a spectrum of different EPR programs out there that would range from, an individual company managing the take back of their own materials all the way through to this joint compliance. When there is joint compliance, that happens through what's called a producer responsibility organization. In other states or other jurisdictions, you might hear this called a stewardship organization. It's all the same general idea. You have a group of producers who form a nonprofit or sometimes for-profit company or organization that manages compliance with the EPR law on behalf of producers. Again, like I said, generally speaking, pros are nonprofit. 3 out of the 4 states in the United States are going to require for EPR for packaging that the pros be nonprofit. But in some jurisdictions, there will be sort of competitive pros that are able to manage compliance and then vie for different producers as sort of their customers, if you will. Generally speaking, most jurisdictions have a single pro. In the US, 3 of the 4 states at the outset, at least, including Colorado, will have one single pro managing compliance for all obligated producers. Oregon at the outset is allowing for multiple pros, and both Colorado and California are also moving towards a multi-pro environment once the programs are established. So there's definitely some differences between policies across different jurisdictions there. The primary responsibility of a pro is to first develop a program plan, and that program plan is then approved by the relevant state agency in the state of Colorado, that's CDPHE, with in Colorado and a number of other U.S. states as well, with oversight and input from an advisory board made up of a diverse array of different stakeholders. And so that then leads into program management within the context and confines of that approved program plan. And then on the producer side, the pro is generally responsible for registering producers, taking in reporting about the amount and types of different packaging, and then developing an approved fee schedule to then collect fees from producers that funds the program. A little bit more detail on that last bullet point there about the different diversity of operations that pros are managing. This is operations and management of the actual program itself, but pros also generally sit in the middle of stakeholder relations and communication. There's a huge data management and reporting effort in order to collect information from producers. Pros are then involved in the financing, and lastly, as well with legal and regulatory compliance on behalf of producers. If we want to head to the next slide, Olivia.
Yeah, sounds good. I can jump back in here. John, thanks for that overview. Again, we're happy to dive into questions if there are any at the end. I think that, hopefully that's helpful context. And, with all of those sort of requirements, well, developments and then requirements in mind, basically at the I think it was spring of last year, where there was a group of companies that was expressed interest in sort of conducting what started as a bit of an academic exercise into what it would take to form a producer responsibility organization. And then and that was when just Oregon and Maine had their laws on the books. And with the passage of new laws in Colorado and then also California, that exercise became a bit more formal, took on a new sense of urgency, and frankly, the producers saw that there was a lot of opportunity there, particularly given some of the structure of the Colorado law and the opportunity to really make a meaningful difference in improving access to recycling in the state. So I think the recycling partnership was in a great position to bring these companies together because of some of the forums and platforms that they had to have companies across industries talk. There were some rumors out there that we've tried to dispel that the recycling partnership wants to be a pro or wanted to be a pro. That wasn't the case. Again, they sort of acted as a bit of an incubator for this work just to get it off the ground. And that changed towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, once we started to get some formal commitments from companies that had been participating in what we called a producer working group, so more of a sort of informal committee. Once those companies said, we want to be the founding members of this organization, we want to make a financial commitment to this organization, that producer working group then shifted to the board structure that we are now in today. And again, I think the opportunity here is in part, we see lots of we see some risk and sort of the companies see risk in leaving compliance to chance and just sort of waiting to see what happens, particularly given that the approval deadline in Colorado for a pro was so imminent. There was a need to organize quickly. I would also say that, the companies that were a part of that producer working group were really united in their vision to see these programs succeed. So regardless of where people were on the policy spectrum during the legislative process, the thinking here is that, there's going to be significant investments that are going to have to be made into these programs and systems. And we want to make sure we get those right and that those lead to meaningful differences in recycling for consumers and for the state. So we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the group's vision and some of the principles that held them together in a moment. But in the meantime, very pleased to announce that we officially have 11 initial members of our board. We're calling them founding members from now. You can see those companies on the screen. I will say that we have active conversations with a few other companies, and we haven't quite finalized our board, even though we've started to meet as a board. And we would expect to have a few more companies join this group and sort of round out the representation that we want to see, particularly from the retail sector. So we're excited about that and would expect that, when we do officially file our application with CDPHE, we have some more producers and board members to note whose involvement we can note. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but again, we mentioned a little bit that there's sort of, you have the producer responsibility organization, the companies are that organization, and we are the group of people who have been supporting them and helping them get to the point and standing up this organization and preparing for the next steps. And we're equipped to do that because the people on this slide have a range of experience, but deep subject matter expertise in EPR, some on the policy side and many on the sort of the pro development and implementation side as well. We've got a few members of our team who are based in Canada and have been involved in setting up stewardship organizations there and in operating those programs. And I would just say also this program team is being built out and it's changing on an almost daily basis as we approach some of these imminent regulatory deadlines and responsibilities. And Colorado, just to know, most significantly, as soon as a pro is approved, the work to find a vendor and work on the needs assessment gets underway almost immediately. And I know that John's going to mention that, but these are the kinds of projects that we're keeping in mind and sort of ensuring that we have the exact right capabilities mapped to the requirements and the next steps. I should also note that this consulting team will likely be in place for a while, but we're also getting near the point where the pro will start to have actual staff. We're sort of acting as staff at the moment, and that includes state level staff in Colorado, and we can touch on that a little bit in a moment too. I would just say finally that, again, it's been a little bit of a point of confusion in some of these conversations. Clear Strategy is leading this project team, but this is a group of independent consultants that Clear Strategy has brought together. We're not all Clear Strategy employees, but again, the emphasis has really been on making sure that we have the right capabilities to bring to bear in this really important startup phase. And again, we'll continue to build that out as we get towards program planning and then implementation. Want to touch on a few key milestones to date, just to give you a sense of, we've mentioned that this group formed early last year. We started engaging Recycle Colorado and other stakeholders this fall, but there was a ton of work that happened in between that I just want to point to because I think it really set the stage for where we are today and preparing for preparing our application in Colorado, and then hopefully preparing to hit the ground running with the needs assessment and other immediate deliverables. So we talked a little bit about how the working group formed. In a moment, I'm going to show you what we're calling our strategic operating principles, which are part of our terms of reference, which outlined how are these organizations going to work together, what are the ways of working, but also what are the what is the vision and what are the core principles that are uniting us as we move from policy development to implementation. And they kind of served as a benchmark for, whether or not an organization wanted to engage with us and continue working with us in a leadership capacity. Mid-year, the group began researching different pro models. As I'd mentioned, we do have some deep experience with some of the Canadian programs right on our team that we've been able to draw from, but also looking at other models. We also talked to existing stewardship models. Obviously, packaging EPR is new in the US, but EPR as a sort of principle and is not. And so we spent time talking to organizations like Med Project, Metrics Recycling Council, Paint Care, and learning how they structured their organizations, what were some of the best practices, what would they do differently. We talked a little bit to the electronics industry too, and heard a lot about how if they could sort of go back in time and create a new structure for their compliance with very different electronics recycling programs across states, they might arrive at a model which is very similar to the one that we've arrived at, which I'm going to show you in a moment, where you kind of have like a core national organization that is delivering certain services across multiple states, but then individual state level organizations or pros that are really responsible for the work on the ground and program implementation. The other thing that we did mid-year was reaching out to various EPR service providers or prospective service providers, both companies that have been doing business in other parts of the world and providing services to pros or being the pros in other jurisdictions with packaging EPR, as well as US organizations. I think this was really important because it started to give us a sense of what the capabilities were in the marketplace, the level of interest of different companies in working with us, and how can we really ensuring that our vision for having a bit of a bespoke model for EPR compliance in the US could actually be achieved. So the idea is that, we're not working with just one EPR service provider. We're not sort of like a vertically integrated company or pro, but we're really taking the best capabilities and the best practices and applying them where needed. And that might look a little different state to state. So, a lot of our conversations have focused on sort of geographic experience and familiarity with state level infrastructure and existing programs. And so, we know that will continue to be important in Colorado and beyond. The other, the last part of the year was really focused on sort of finalizing the structure I described to you in our model and establishing the financing for our organization, getting some of the initial governments underway, and then officially incorporating in December, which is very exciting. This is the point in which we also started some of the stakeholder engagement I mentioned to you, and we started chatting with Recycle Colorado and other groups, as well as engaging with state regulatory agencies. So I believe we started our conversations with Darla and the team at CDPHE in the late fall, and it's been really great to be able to keep them posted on our progress and help ensure that we have the most accurate understanding of the law and the next steps in the process as possible. This quarter, it's been a lot of work, really exciting work. And as I mentioned, we've got our board in place now. So a lot of the early months of the year were dedicated to working on our governments. We have started to broaden and as well as deepen our stakeholder engagement, more regular conversations with regulators, CDPHE I'd mentioned, and then really with our eyes on the prize of getting ourselves in a really strong position to be able to first submit our letter of intent in Colorado, which we did on March 1st, and then finalize our application, which is due April 1st. Anything critical I missed there, John, before we move on?
No, I think that covers it.
Excellent. I'm gonna go through this quicker than I'd like to, just because it's a lot of words, but I do think it's really, and again, you'll get the deck. We're very happy to talk in further detail about any element of this presentation. But I just, again, want to sort of underline that it was really important early in the process that the group, it was our producer working group at the time, now our board, aligned on some core principles just to make sure that, we're all rowing in the same direction. And generally, we're hoping to see the same things and not the exact same things, but really ensuring that everyone who is on board is committed to the successful implementation of these programs. And so a lot of this, I would just note that the principles could evolve slightly, particularly as we move into this next phase of work. And, there's all sorts of operational complexities that we're uncovering as we talk to state regulators and start to contemplate, potential rule concepts and things that weren't necessarily addressed in the legislation. But I think generally this should give you a sense of the objectives of the group and what we want to see in a program, in a successful program. I'll just comment maybe on a few of the bullets. I mean, I think the first one, as we look at the different requirements, knowing that this is an organization that is potentially going to be operating across multiple states, there's a lot of differences in state laws, as people know, and we do feel like there's we identified value in sort of having this a national organization that balances national level stakeholder engagement and the need to achieve cost efficiencies for producers of all kinds and sizes wherever we can, with that robust local representation and local engagement that we know is going to need to be in place for this program to be successful. We'll talk more about the structure in a second, but that first principle is really tied to that. I think some of the other highlights I would flag on this page are things like, focusing on the consumer and ensuring that they are really getting a better experience with recycling and able to more meaningfully participate in programs, both through improved access, through promotion and education. and that we are, really bringing them on board as their participation is going to be the key to these programs' success. Their participation also, needless to say, to this group contributes to a cleaner stream of materials going into curbside bins and other systems, so that the pro can really start to make informed and investments about in recycling infrastructure and things like, where does sortation need to be optimized, as an example. I think the end market piece is really important. We need to ensure that we're taking the full recycling supply chain approach and showing the viability of collecting and sorting and sorting and recycling the packaging that's supplied into the marketplace. That really takes on additional importance as, different states talk about things like end market requirements. But it also is critically important because we know that many of the companies that are around the table are needing to get material back and have a higher volume of high quality materials so that they can reincorporate it into their packaging and meet their packaging sustainability goals, and really start to close the loop on packaging here in the US and in Colorado in particular. So again, I would just say that just gives you a flavor for some of these principles. We may build on them as we go and as we talk to more stakeholders and other people in the packaging value chain and certainly in the recycling community as well. But hopefully that gives everyone a sense of the things that have been important to this group from now to formation. So we've touched on this a little bit, but the structure that we have landed on is, as I described at a high level earlier, really having this national services organization that's the 501c3 that can then that can then support state level pros, including a new pro in Colorado. The important thing to remember here is that it is the Colorado Pro that is going to be responsible for implementing the EPR program, for helping to figure out, what the right investments are and where the improvements need to be, collaborating with stakeholders to get to those decisions, and really ensuring that the program is implemented and run as smoothly as possible. The role of the National Services Organization, in contrast, is to ensure that the local pro, the state pro, can really have the time and space and resources to focus on the work that matters, because they're not trying to do things like build net new IT systems. One of the things that we've talked about a lot with different producers and stakeholders is a reporting portal, and that's just a very obvious thing that you sort of have to imagine is rather costly and time intensive to create, and frankly probably doesn't need to look radically different for each of the EPR states. So for anyone that's producing in Colorado and beyond, there's a huge sort of efficiency in being able to go into one system and select, the state that you're reporting for and then put in the specific data, versus having to, first invest in multiple systems and then figure out how you're going to be learning and fulfilling your compliance obligation through each. So again, I think that's kind of, and there are additional resources that could exist at that national level, potentially some legal or HR resources, other IT resources, sort of CRM tools, those kinds of things that can then be leveraged and customized and as needed by the state pro, so that, again, you're not having to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch and put, additional money into those programs at the state level where resources could otherwise go towards sort of program planning and implementation. John, I know do you have any other comments on this? I know that we see some value in sort of that additional value in the role that a national services organization can play in sort of harmonizing other aspects of the program across states while still maintaining that focus on local needs.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, in addition to, the sort of producer considerations at a national level, and then in each state around things like that, IT system and a reporting portal, not reinventing the wheel state to state on some of these things that you can really have some economies of scale at the national level. I mean, I think there's also value here from each state's perspective, thinking about some of, the goals of the programs, specifically we've been thinking a lot about eco-modulation. I know state agencies have also been thinking a lot about eco-modulation and the other incentives that are built into the program. And, if we have sort of a national conversation that's able to happen both between states, but then also between producers through a pro, and then the state pros, I think there's a lot more opportunity to make sure that all of the different incentives, that the market signals that are being sent through these programs are able to push in the same direction. And I think that's something that we've been really trying to think a lot about is, how do we make sure that, different policies, where you have state policies that meet state needs, but there are also state policies that are pushing up to regional or national markets. How are we making sure that all of these pieces are aligning and moving in the right direction so that local needs can be met, while also making sure that, local goals that push up to the national level can also not be in conflict, but be moving in the same direction. So I'm gonna take over really quickly here, Olivia, if that's all right. Just wanted to quickly touch on the tight timeline here that we've got for Colorado. Again, some of you may be very familiar with this timeline to varying degrees, but just wanted to quickly talk through. Olivia mentioned we sent in a letter of intent on the 1st of March. We'll be sending in an application to be the pro in Colorado on April 1st. And then by May 1st, CDPHE will be making an announcement about which pro will be, the approved pro to operate in Colorado. I think, as we're going through April and May and into the summer, I mean, we're really trying to think about the timeline here, and I think things are very tight. I know a lot of you have been thinking about the needs assessment, this large study that's going to be done by the approved pro or by a third-party contractor hired by the approved pro by September 1st is when that contract needs to be in place, and then the study needs to be finished by January of 2024. So that's a really tight timeline, and we're trying to think as a pro submitting an application to CDPHE, how do we prep ourselves and prepare ourselves and start working to make sure that needs assessment and the third-party contractor that's going to do that, is able to be set up for success and to be able to do that work. And so, that process, then the needs assessment process will lead into 3 different scenarios that will be presented to the Joint Budget Committee next March. That's again another sort of step in the process that we're thinking a lot about. I think the needs assessment, and the goal of the needs assessment is to really carefully understand the lay of the land in Colorado right now. What are the gaps? What are the needs? What is needed to ramp up to a really successful system for managing packaging and paper in Colorado. And we want to make sure that when those 3 scenarios head to the JBC, they're able to have a clear line of sight into the needs and are able to make an approval on one of those scenarios, so that we then can lead into full program operation, which is there at the bottom of the slide here. The pro that's approved will have just under a year after JBC approval to put together a program plan, which is that core requirement and responsibility of the pro, and then from the submission of the program plan and then through program plan approval, again with oversight from the advisory board and approval by CDPHE, will then the approved pro will move into program operation.
Thanks, John. Okay, we're going to wrap up with just making sure that everyone's clear on our next steps, and then we'd love to hear your questions. We've said this a few times, but the next step here is submitting that application. And we understand, and CDPHE can certainly clarify, that they're expecting to spend about 30 days reviewing the applications that are submitted on April 1st. So the idea would be that in early May, hopefully there is a pro that has been approved and can move forward with that, to work on that lightning quick timeline that John described to get the needs assessment done. John, I think, spoke really well to the needs assessment, but this is a really critical step for understanding where are the gaps, where are there needs for improvements, where are there needs for new systems entirely, and what do we think all of that's going to cost. So that will then inform what obligated producers have to pay into the system. But the step before that John had mentioned is there's sort of a few different scenarios that could come out of the needs, that will come out of the needs assessment that one of which is ultimately approved by the Joint Budget Committee. And that's a bit of a unique feature to the Colorado law. I think the last point here is just that I don't think that this program can be successful without, these kinds of conversations and meaningful engagement with stakeholders at every single step in the process. This is, of course, a bit more of a formal presentation, but we're really excited to build these relationships with all of you. We know that even if we can't answer exact questions right now related to, what are going to be the formal bodies or structures in which stakeholders can provide feedback to the pro, just because of where we are in sort of organization formation, all of that is being developed. But I can reassure you that sort of the bias of this organization is toward more collaboration and consultation rather than less. And we know that there are a lot of different players in the system who we need to be speaking to and understanding their perspectives to build a program that's going to be successful. I think, again, if you'd like to chat one-on-one following this presentation, we're very happy to start those conversations now. For anyone who sort of just wants to watch this play out, that's okay too. You saw the timeline, and there's obviously a lot of hurdles that need to be jumped before we get to the point where, if you're a producer, you're starting an agreement with this organization and paying fees. But I think that it'll be once the organization is approved, and if that's our organization, we'll be getting back to this group with more information, and I think even sort of specific questions and requests, thinking about the needs assessment specifically, John, and some of the inputs that I know, like whichever consultant is ultimately approved to do that assessment will need to be able to truly understand the state of play in Colorado. I imagine there are many stakeholders on this call who could be very helpful and in informing that work. So I will stop there. I'm just going to go to the next slide so you can see take down my contact information, which Liz can share with you as well. Again, if there are follow-on questions you don't want to ask in this forum, if there's anything, if you want to learn more, or even just chat, if you like what you heard and you want to talk about what you might be able to do to provide support to our organization in the short term, we'd be very, very happy to hear from you and connect one-on-one. So I will turn it back to Liz and team to see if there are any comments, things we can immediately clarify, questions you have, or questions coming in from the group.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Thank you, John. That was an exciting presentation, and I'm very impressed with the amount of information the two of you were able to convey to us in a short period of time. Thank you. And thank you as an audience member for going back and forth. It's always really interesting. It keeps our attention. So thank you for adding that to your presentation style. There is a question in the chat. KJ has asked, if you are selected as the PRO, where do you engage local recyclers in the assessment process? And what will you need from local recyclers in this process?
I can jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Olivia, I think, KJ, thanks for the question. I mean, I think there's a couple pieces here. I mean, one, as we sort of move through first the application process, and then sort of if approved into engagement with a wider array of different stakeholders in Colorado, I think the first line of contact is just to start having conversations with different stakeholders throughout the state. I think the success of these programs are going to be built on the relationships that are built between the different stakeholders, but also between the different stakeholders and the producers through the pro. Specifically in terms of the needs assessment, that won't be the pro who's doing a tremendous amount of the data engagement and gathering and outreach. That will be done through the third party contractor who wins the bid through a competitive RFP process that hopefully will kick off sometime in May, June, depending on the pro approval timeline. It'll be that third party who does the data collection, trying to understand capacity of recyclers, trying to understand scope of work, trying to understand needs and future growth and future system improvements and changes. It'll be that third party that's going out and collecting all of those different pieces of data, and that will then be brought into the larger needs assessment report that's finished up towards the beginning of 2024.
And KJ, did that answer your question? And did you have a follow-up? No, okay. And I'm looking, I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I am looking at my screen to see if anybody's coming off mic or has their hand raised. All right, I will jump in with a question while I wait for that to happen. You guys use the term eco-modulation several times, and just in the interest of making sure everybody that's watching now or will watch in the future, could you speak to what that term means?
Absolutely. I can take this one as well, Olivia. So eco-modulation is actually a relatively new-ish concept in the EPR world. Generally speaking, the principle of eco-modulation is a desire to push certain design changes within packaging markets based on the fee structure, the fees that are charged to producers for different types of packaging. And so there's environmental incentives or environmental principles that are, adopted through eco-modulation that are meant to either turn up or turn down different attributes of packaging based on sort of environmental considerations. I will say that generally speaking, the fees that are designed within the system, within, the general base fees, if you will, that are designed, do already have, an amount of eco-modulation built into them. There's a principle of fairness built into the fees where packaging based on the cost to manage it through the system, whether that's through recycling or through, disposal if the material can't currently be recycled, those costs, the cost to do that management is built into the fee structure. So if you have, a material like, a cardboard, for instance, that already has strong markets, is already highly recyclable, that material might have lower fees because there are ready markets for that material. Whereas a material that doesn't necessarily have ready markets or has some negative impact on the current management system, those fees are going to naturally reflect that impact. So the base fees already have some of that going on, and then eco-modulation steps in and with a number of different environmental thoughts or environmental principles in mind, turns up or turns down other attributes. So I know, there's a very wide conversation taking place in the EU right now, and then in Canada as well, and now across US states as well, to sort of figure out what those eco-modulation factors are, and then think about, how do you operationalize the sort of turning up and turning down of these different factors. And I think that's, a conversation that's still underway and will continue to roll out over the next couple of years.
Thanks, John. Oh, sorry, Liz, I didn't mean to jump in on your facilitation there. I see another question from Raquel.
Yeah, this might be too broad of a question for you guys, but maybe not. So I'm just going to ask, maybe this is more of a question for Darla or those involved in the legislation. With the producer responsibility bill, I understand we're shifting the cost burden. So I'm just thinking just in terms of consumer and product, I love Trader Joe's, but they're notoriously bad for excessive packaging. Is Trader Joe's the one then responsible for those fees if they're selling in Colorado, or is it the item itself, and then Trader Joe's is just the supplier?
So Jen and John, you can jump in here if you want to add anything, or if I've said anything silly, but just thinking about the case of Trader Joe's, because their products, even if they're not making them, those are branded by Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's, under the Colorado definitions, is going to be the obligated producer. So they are a retailer, not typically thought of as a brand owner, but in most cases, I would assume they would be considered the producer under the Colorado law and paying the fees and being a member of the pro for whatever it is, right? Like their bottled water, their pasta sauce jar. So yeah, that I think that's at a very high level, that would be where the obligation sits. And that the same is true just in the retail community. Obviously not everyone works quite the same model as Trader Joe's, but the retailers are going to primarily be responsible for private label. Whereas, it's going to be the brand owner, the Coke, for example, in a Kroger that's responsible for that packaging. Sorry, I saw another question.
Yeah, I have been curious about the time frame around when the PRO starts collecting fees, and also on the flip side, the communities or residents that will be reimbursed for recycling fees, will there be enough funds in the bucket, in the budget to be able to reimburse? And will it be a reimbursement? Let's say if it's a community that has organized a recycling program, does the community pay and then get reimbursed, or will the PRO just start directly paying the hauler?
It's a complicated question. I think it's going to vary on a community by community basis. Just on the producer question about fees, that the fees start getting collected, John, January 1st, 2026?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to jump in on sort of how whether it's reimbursement or just, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, Laura, on your question about, will there be enough funds? Yes, whatever requirements there are within the approved program plan that need to be paid for by producers through the PRO, those funds will be collected starting January 1st, 2026 and moving forward on an annual basis. So the funds will be there from the producer side to make sure that the obligations within the program plan are covered. As to how money moves throughout the system, it's really too early to say exactly what all of that is going to look like. That's really part of the program plan process, and I think it's going to look different depending on who the money is moving to, what the relationship between the PRO and that entity look like, and that really is going to unfold over the next 2 to 3 years as sort of the early program plans get discussed and talked about between all the different stakeholders, and then as the PRO moves into developing that program plan. So I wish I could have a more satisfying answer for you, but it really depends on a lot of different moving factors, and it's really too early at this point to say exactly what this will look like.
Understood. Thank you.
Oh, I'm gonna defer to Rachel. You go first.
Thanks, Liz. So I have a question along those lines with the services to communities. Obviously, the program plan won't roll out until 2026, and you'll be doing a lot of work to gear up for that. But EcoCycle has does work with a lot of municipalities, both through the project that Laura described earlier, the technical assistance project, and then one-on-one contracts. And we're really encouraging them to move forward with getting organized hauling in their communities. And that's always been our message, but now we can say it's going to be a lot easier for the PRO to come in quickly and support you if you have an organized hauling system. So I'm just curious if there's plans, if the PRO is planning on engaging with communities prior to that 2026 to help reinforce that message, and if there's more specific language that we can get. Obviously, you might not have that now, but as you start developing the plan, as you see the needs assessment, if you can share with us messaging that would help us to really encourage decision makers at local levels to really think about what they can do in their local municipalities to help facilitate the process. That's really helpful.
Go ahead, John.
I can take a stab, and then Olivia, if you want to fill it. Rachel, it's a really good question. I think there's some elements of it that are similar to Laura's question, where it's a bit early to necessarily say exactly how all of that is going to play out. I think, I also don't know if the PRO is quite ready to start sort of discussing exactly, what policy principles and positions would be for stakeholders on the ground. I think ultimately, municipalities need to make decisions that are best for them. And if that, if it feels for a municipality that they want to have a more active role in the system and, be moving towards a single hauler contract or some other form of contract that works best for them to then work with the PRO, that's their prerogative. They're absolutely able to do that. I think, from the PRO's perspective, again, it's probably too early to pontificate too much about, what the PRO's priority or preference would be within the system. But, at the end of the day, under the EPR program, all Coloradoans will have access to recycling, whether that's through, a contract between the PRO and a hauler, or a PRO and a municipality. So the provision of service will be there. I think it's just a question for municipalities about how involved in the system they want to be.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, with totally respecting and sort of supporting the guidance that you've been providing for obvious reasons based on, where things are now and the need to deal with a lot of this material now. I do think it would be a little bit premature for us to say, oh, this, make a recommendation, right, to a municipality, or, suggest that they invest in, X instead of Y, or move towards, as John mentioned, a certain kind of arrangement with a hauler or haulers versus another. But again, I think hopefully sort of the needs assessment is really instrumental in showing where those gaps are and revealing and leading to some determinations around the question that we can't answer today, which is, which model is right for specific communities. But that I would say, again, there's nothing that would preclude us from having sort of informational conversations and, helping, especially as we get further down the road, helping municipalities just understand sort of what is possible, right, and what the law requires, and sort of how we sort of see this all going. It's just probably not those sort of like concrete recommendations at this point that you're referring to.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks,
yeah.
Olivia. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Olivia.
No, I was just gonna see if there's any other questions. We're happy to keep going, but I wasn't sure what else you have on your agenda.
Well, we are getting to the point where we're wrapping up the presentation Q&A, but I want to give it the old awkward Zoom pause and make sure people that are fumbling with the mute button or the hand raise have a minute to get that. Thank you. Olivia has added, Olivia.
Oh, that was a direct message.
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
Let me do this again.
Putting her contact information into the chat. As they stated, they're in the process of applying to be the PRO. And so if you would like to learn more about that process, or if you're excited about what you've heard today, they would be happy to have further conversations with you about what it looks like to support their efforts. Thank you, John. Or thank you for both John and Olivia's message. I think I've stalled enough, so I will ask Allie to conclude the recording and